You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 176. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
Today we continue along our line of conversations about characteristics of what leaders need to know. And we're talking about nurturing community. That comes in the line of, well, we've already talked about purpose. We've talked about relationship, self-awareness, accountability. It all leads to community. That's what we'll be talking about today.
So as a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast. On that page, you'll find the things that we mentioned in this episode, along with the reflection questions to help you take action on what you are listening to today. So Tim, what is community?
Well, community is about the inter-relatedness of people. So it starts with relationships. It's about belonging to something larger than ourselves. I think for me, maybe the best part of community is I can say I'm a valued part of this body and have contributions to make. And I don't only say that about myself, but I can say that about you and others. We all have something to offer, and what we have to offer has worth and has value. For me, I become who I'm supposed to be because I'm related to the people around me who are part of the larger community, the nurturing community.
So when we're a part of community, we're not just thinking about ourselves. Is that fair to say?
If I'd thought of it that way, I would have said that too. That's exactly right. It's not about me, and it's not about individuals, although we are individuals and we all have our own contribution to make, but it's about how we are connected to one another and how our lives are enriched with one another.
Yeah, and why I said that, half joking, but really being serious, is when we see ourselves as a part of a community, we're not only thinking about the people around us, but in a Christian community, we're thinking about how are we relating to Jesus and how are we relating to the people who are gathered all around us, living in the neighborhoods that surround us, run businesses. All of those aspects come into community.
Sarah, let me say it this way. When you bring Jesus into it, community for me, especially in the church, is where do I see Jesus in the people around me? And when you broaden that to the rest of the community, where do we see Jesus in the community? Where do we see Jesus in the people in the community, in the businesses? And so it's really a place where if I think of it, I'm thinking of Jesus inviting me into the world, into the community, and that's where I'll meet him, is in the people there. So that's part of what I think of when we begin to talk about Christian community.
So is one of the challenges then to nurturing community, and we're going to get to 3 aspects of nurturing community here in a second, is one of the challenges of nurturing community that we lose sight of the people around us, and we lose sight of, dare I say, Jesus in our midst, because whether it's we're too busy, we're in a rush, we're too focused on something that is not right in front of us, that we don't even pause and pay attention to where is Jesus in the midst of this, and how is Jesus showing up? We take it for granted, I guess is what I'm getting at.
I would agree with that, and maybe I would add this, and that is, if you and I don't have an awareness of Jesus in our own lives, it's going to be hard to recognize Jesus in the lives of others. So there is a way in which we're practicing the presence of Christ, the presence of Jesus in our own personal lives, which allows us then to recognize how Jesus shows up in the lives of others, in the community. in individuals. That's what you were just saying. I'm just thinking of it this way.
Yeah. Okay. So are we ready to get into the 3 aspects of nurturing community?
Sure. I'm with you. Let's go.
Okay. So the first one is all about connection. And I don't know about you, Tim, but when I think about being connected to other people at a very basic human level, I look around and go, oh, yeah, there are people here who are like me. Here's a silly but truthful example. And I still experience this sometimes in our denominational circles, which is really frightening to me in my late 40s. Backtrack 20 years ago, I would walk into a room and I'd look around and go, why is everyone here my parents' age? Was it impossible for me to have community in that moment? Absolutely not. But there was something that then I had to seek out that went beyond, dare I say, the superficial, and I had to step into something deeper. I think at a very basic level, each one of us as humans, we want to see people and connect with people who we have something in common with. And that can happen in lots of different ways. I'm giving you a superficial example, but if connection is the first aspect of a nurturing community, we've got to stop and think about, how do people connect?
And part of what we've talked about over the last few months, part of that connection also comes because self-awareness. It's who we are and what we're looking for in other people. It doesn't mean that if we don't have an instant connection with the people in the room that we're not part of the community. But there's a place where we have to be able to ask ourselves, what contribution do I make and what do I receive from others? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think for me, the other piece there is, I'm going to go back to my silly example of walking into a room and going, why is everybody here my parents' age? As soon as there was someone that either I sat down next to or reached out their hand and said, hey, Sarah, we're so glad that you're here. That's all that it took for me to know that I was getting connected and I was becoming a part of something that was bigger than me. And I think both of those things are a part of it.
So part of it is that you feel like they want you there.
Right.
So once there's that connection, it's not like you're the only person in the room a certain age, but all of a sudden there's a deeper connection other than age.
Yeah, and I think I'm thinking of it again from the human level. What do we want and what do we need? We want someone to notice that we're there and to welcome us into this space. So think about, we've all had this experience, and I'm not saying this because it's a negative thing, but we've all had an experience where we've walked into a church, we've sat down, and we've walked back out, and no one has ever said a word to us.
I've had that experience.
There isn't a connection there. It makes all the difference in the world if someone who is sitting at the other end of the pew or the other end of the row that you're in leans over and even, waves a hand and says, hey, good morning. Glad that you're here. And if they're really seeking to make a connection, they might reach out their hand or put up a fist bump in this COVID era. Good morning. Glad that you're here. I'm thinking again about a church setting, that when we become so comfortable with our surroundings that when new people are showing up, we lose sight of them. Or at the reverse, we make way too big of a deal about the fact that they're there, because that's freaky too. been there too. I think the other thing that I want to say about this one and connection in a church community is our primary connection needs to be to Jesus.
There you go, bringing Jesus back into it.
I know. What can I say? If Jesus is not the center of all we are doing, we're missing the point of why we are connected to that community and what we are nurturing people to be a part of. Jesus needs to be at the center of everything that we're doing. And so to play on that a little bit, and Tim, you and I have had a conversation about this, having conversations with pastors and folks in the local church, just simply asking a question. What was it that you missed when we weren't worshiping in person? And it wasn't that they missed learning about Jesus. It wasn't that they missed the teachings of their pastor. It wasn't that they missed the prayer time. It wasn't that they might have missed participating in a choir, but it wasn't the music because we found a way to do that. What they missed was the social connection to people. Now, I'm currently on a mission to make Zoom meetings not suck. Tim has heard me say this, and because I think that even using technology, we can have a connection with people. Is it different? Absolutely. But we can have and we can make those connections. We can make connections via telephone calls. We can make connections via text messages. I am not comparing them to in-person experiences. Yes, there is a difference. But if we didn't make those connections when we weren't worshiping in person, and what you were missing was the social connection, what I want to ask you is the church that you participate in, and some of you are going to stop listening to this episode right after I say this because you're going to get mad at me for saying it, is the church that you are participating in anything more than a social club?
Sarah, I can remember times in my ministry where people would be upset about something in the church. For whatever reason, it didn't make any difference, but would say to me, I'd leave if it weren't for the relationships I have here. Relationships are extremely important. You don't have to be in the church to have strong relationships. The part
Bingo.
of being in the church is what you're talking about, is that we are followers of Jesus. And Jesus is the glue. The love of God through Jesus is what holds us together. And if that's what we lose, then we seek other ways to hold ourselves together.
Right.
And that may be, and if I may go down this path, that may be political views. That may be views on different social issues. It may be any number of things which take us away from Jesus, who has us loving God and loving neighbor. And that's the difference of a nurturing community that we call a Christian community or a Jesus community from a club.
Right.
That's the way I'd think of it.
Right.
Well, you and I are on the same page with this. It may be, by some surprise, that we express ourselves in different ways. So,
the second aspect of a nurturing community or nurturing a community is contribution. And of course, this is connected to the first one, connection. And I'd start this one off by saying that when you're a part of a community and being nurtured in community, you're seen and you're heard, and what you contribute matters. And that can be as simple in a Christian community as showing up and being present. It can be as simple as that. It can be as complex as you're making a contribution to, leading a committee or team, leading in worship in some way, being a part of a care team and taking care of people. But what you contribute matters. Your value, and I want to be very clear on this, you're valued for who you are, not who someone wants you to be. And it's not all about, Sarah, what did you get done today that benefits me? It's that, Sarah, I see you and I see what you contribute. And because of who you are and that contribution that you make out of who God's created you to be, that's what I'm celebrating. I think the hang up here is we get into the vicious cycle of someone either leading a committee or serving in a specific way in the local church, and they don't think that they can get out of that because their only value is in that role. So it's not about the role that you are filling or the task that you are doing. It's about who you are as a child of God.
Another way that I think of it, because I hear it often, is that contribution is not necessarily because you're a teenager. And what I hear people say is, we need younger people in the church. My question is why? And it's usually because we want to keep the church going. It's not for the contribution. It's not for what strengths or gifts somebody might bring to the body. It's because we've got this idea that if we don't have younger people, we may not exist.
Right. So it might even be as simple in that example, Tim, as saying we have a very basic value as a Christian community that we are multi-generational. And when one piece of our generation is missing, we together are not the community that we need to be. Because you bring different viewpoints, you bring different life experiences, you bring different sass. Not that I'm thinking about anybody in particular. Okay, let's change the generations. Yeah, we've all experienced this. The older that we get, the more willing we are to speak our mind, right? And so when we don't have some of our more seasoned generations, sometimes we get stuck in the niceties and we never speak the truth in love to one another. Tim, you want to pick on me?
Well,
I'm inviting him to.
And that's only because we've had conversation about this before. Sarah, you're one of the most talented people I know and very gifted, and I've learned a lot from you. It's just amazing to me, and it's because I don't do it, that the way you work keeps Post-it notes in business. It's because the way you put things together are always with Post-it notes. Now, if I'm insecure and not part of the community and don't have, and I'm not sensitive to what you can bring to this, I may think that's really foolish. I may think that's really a waste of time. But that's the way you're able to put your thoughts together and to work. And that may be a very simplistic example, but when we have a certain idea or an aspect in mind, and we're not allowing other people to use their gifts and strengths the way they can do it, because they think differently and they process things differently, we're really not taking seriously their contribution. So yes, I'll pick on you. Those Post-it notes. But I'm learning how you think and how you process, and I learn from what you do. So I'm willing to allow that to be a part of my life in terms of
You're willing to allow it?
Well, there are times, Sarah. There are times I just have to give in.
Well,
and everyone needs to know that I'm joking.
Yeah.
We're joking with each other.
Yeah. So I would go as far as to say, when we were doing most everything in person, there were always Post-its there. And sometimes I wasn't the one who brought them because people know about me. Sarah's going to bring out the Post-its at some point in time. And so they were like, again, this is about being known and being seen. And yeah, I mean, people talk about the different love languages. I think that Post-its might be a love language, because you can never have enough and enough different sizes and enough different colors, because they do all different sorts of things. So yeah, quirky, absolutely. But what's the contribution that I make because of that? I can think about what's the logical way that we need to communicate something. How are we going to teach something? What is the flow for a meeting that we're going to host? What are the factors that need to be brought in? And whether I'm doing that on my own or doing that with a group of people, it's a way to process information. That's what I can offer. And do I use Post-its to do it? Absolutely. And I'm not going to apologize for it.
Another way of contribution that I think we need to remember in the church, especially when we are working with teams, committees, whatever, and that is, if I may pick on you again, you process by writing, I process by speaking.
Right.
And so and usually we assume, if we're not self-aware and understanding the gifts and contributions, the strengths of the people around us, we assume everybody processes the way we process.
Right.
So we really have to be sensitive, because what we do then is really cut ourselves off from some valuable contribution from people, because we've made an assumption and we're not living into the wholeness or completeness of what God has given us.
Yeah, and one of the most powerful questions that I've learned to ask because of that is, what am I missing? And part of what that does is, when you ask that question, it gives people the opportunity to say, I don't know what we're missing, but I need some more time to be able to step back and think about this. Or can we pause on this? Because I think let's say we've got a 5-point agenda. I think number 4, if we're on number 2, is going to help us answer the question. It opens up the opportunity for those differences to be named, and also to create the space for people to be able to engage in that. And usually, again, I'm going with the assumption of people know who they know who they are in Christ, and we're not being manipulative in our actions, that I'm assuming good intent. That's the simplest way that I can say it. That when we do things like that and ask questions like that, we're helping people to make their contribution in ways that we could never name for somebody else.
I know we have another piece to talk about, but there's an exercise that you do, and I think it may come from Brene Brown, but that's container building. And that allows, in a meeting, allows to set some parameters or guidelines, guardrails, so that people can make a contribution and feel like they're doing it without being judged or dismissed.
Yeah, and one of the questions, it's very simple. What do you need to have a successful experience? Whether that's on a team, whether that's, you're planning for something, whether that's a learning experience, what do you need? And Tim's already mentioned it, but this is where, as individuals, we have to be able to say, I need time to be able to process the information. Don't expect me to make a decision right on the spot. Or I need the agenda in advance so that I can come prepared and be ready to make a contribution in the meeting that we're having. Or I need to have the meetings on my calendar. I need to have the meetings on my calendar at least a month to 6 weeks in advance, because I work that far in advance. And the answer is likely going to be no if you need me to do something in the next week or two, because my calendar's full. It's not that I'm saying no to you. It's simply that I'm saying no because there isn't space. You get the point, that asking people what they need. Before we move on to our final aspect of a nurturing community, Tim, what are your thoughts on how do individuals in a Christian community identify the needs of the community and assess how you can make a contribution?
Sarah, the first thing that comes to mind is something that we've talked about. And oh, by the way, we're coming up on 3 years of podcasts.
Shh.
And from the very beginning, we were talking about and assessing needs of a community was just asking some missional questions. And it's not sitting in the room and asking those questions, but it's actually engaging the community and answering those questions. So what are assets? What are needs? Individuals, man, another thing that we've been talking about, I didn't know I was going to be marketing our podcast and the work that we do. But the other thing is just identifying strengths and how we're put together, how we think, and identifying those becomes a great asset in terms of addressing needs. So, I always think about wanting to surround myself with people who can do the things that I can't do. It doesn't make me less. Actually, it makes me look better. So if I can surround myself with people who do things really well, and I can depend on them, and what few things I do well, they can depend on me, then we're able to work together to meet the needs larger in a community that we're finding out as we're relating to the community. What is important to this community? What would you want to change if you could change anything? Are you willing to do that? And then the questions like what services are here, whether that's police, fire, whatever, and how do we connect with those as a congregation or as individuals or as a group of people? How do we connect with those? And who is it in the congregation that has relationships in the community that we can come alongside them and meet needs? So whether that's where you were going or not, I jumped into that one because that's exactly what I think the church ought to be doing. You're getting my biased opinion now. That's exactly what the church ought to be doing in terms of the community. But God has already gifted us in every church to be able to do this in the community that we're located. We're already gifted to do it. We can have other people, new people, younger people, whatever. Those people will also add to it, but you already have the giftedness that you need to meet the needs of a community. That's where I am.
Yeah, and so what you just heard Tim walk through is that if someone comes and says, I want to use art to connect with kids in the neighborhood, the answer isn't, okay, go ahead and do that. The answer isn't, well, how are you going to make that happen? The answer is, if that's your passion, and it very well might begin in that place, where is the need? And is that a need? Because it might be that it's not the kids in the neighborhood who need an art outlet. Say that 10 times fast. It might be that there's a group of seniors who need to come together to have a place of, community and connect around something creative. I'm totally pulling that out of thin air, but you get my point that somebody might have a passion about something, and just because I'm passionate about something doesn't mean that there is a need. And sometimes there is not a need, and so the best thing that we can do as leaders is help them explore where is that need. Where can you be of service? And sometimes that's not within the church. And it's not within the ministries of the church. Sometimes it takes people beyond the bounds of the church.
Let me bring Jesus back into it just for a moment. I did have a person in a church once who said he wanted to start a choir in an elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
It was just down the street. His point in starting the choir wasn't because he wanted to teach kids to sing, because he couldn't carry a tune.
Right.
He didn't read music. He didn't play an instrument. What he wanted to do was to pray with the kids. And the way he could pray with the kids was getting them together in a choir, because the need for the school was vocal music. What we did as the church was to connect people to Jesus. So we used vocal music to do that. And that's what you're talking about, because there were people then who got outside the walls of the church, got connected to a community of children that also got them connected to their parents, right, which then began to transform a neighborhood. And I've seen that happen. So that's just to illustrate what you were talking about.
So we've talked about connection and we've talked about contribution. Are we ready for the third and final aspect of a nurturing community?
If you're asking me, I am.
Okay. And that is care. Part of what a community offers to us is that they remind us that we're loved. And we experience love in that community. And it's not just on the receiving end, but that you have the opportunity to give care to others and express love to other people. It's also a place that, if we're going to be about nurturing community, that it's a recognition of who is around you. And I'm going to say, start by thinking about that geographically. Literally, who are the people physically around you? what are their needs? What are their contributions? What are the differences that exist that you might be able to make a connection? You might be able to make a contribution. They might be able to make a contribution, that there is a give and take in that, that it's not the doing for, but it is the becoming together, that we learn how to love one another. I think we make it more complicated than it needs to be, because for me, it's really just about show up and be present.
If truly we're talking about loving God and loving neighbor, and then how we express ourselves in care for one another, it's really not that difficult, because we're loving people the way we've been loved. This is a very good thing, but it's one of the pitfalls that we have in community, and especially around caring. And that is, at a time when we need to have care, when there's crisis or there's trauma. But that's not the only time we need care. But in too many instances in our churches, it's only in those times of crisis and trauma that we actually experience the care, or even give the care, because I'm going to go back to the place, we have not been in touch with ourselves, or with Jesus within ourselves, to the place where we know that every day we're in the arms of a living God who is working for our good, and that's what God really wants us to do for one another. And that would be the basic care, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's really just, it's not that complicated. I'm just thinking of some simple examples. Do you have someone that you can text and say, "Did you see what happened about?" Fill in the blank of one of the things that is important to you, and that they don't receive that text and go, "Why are you sending me this?" They receive that text and say, "How wonderful is that?" Or when there is a concern, "I need you to pray for," and you know that they're going to pray. We all need those people. And if we're nurturing a community, part of the job of the community is to help people, guess what, find those connections so that they can make a contribution, because then we find the places that we can care for one another and be cared for, and know that someone cares. They care whether you show up. They care whether you're there. They care whether you are doing okay. It's the ordinary stuff of life.
Yeah, I think care would also be fundamental to both connection and contribution as well. And as leaders, one way that you can show care that will develop the other aspects that we've talked about today is really saying to someone who has responsibility, "What can I do to help you do what you're doing?" Or, "What do you need from me to get your job done?" What you're doing there is acknowledging their gifts and graces. At the same time, you are giving value to their contribution, and without really doing anything else other than saying, "I really care that you're doing what you're doing, and I want to help you."
Anything else that we need to say about that one?
Sarah, it's just me. I think people should care a lot about this.
Tim, any final thoughts on the three aspects of a nurturing community?
Sarah, we've talked about many things in this last 30 minutes or so. With all the things we have talked about, I think community is the one that we really need to work on, from my perspective. And what I mean to work on is developing the relationships that actually value people for who they are, and inviting them to make the contributions that they can make. And whether we agree or disagree, we love one another. That's really what community is about. And if we can't do anything else over these these next few weeks with the people that we've interviewed, I hope that's what you're here. That's what people hear, is that we value you. We want you to be the best you can be. And it's really because we love you. And that we wouldn't be doing this for any other reason.
That's a good word. Well, I hope that as we walk through these three aspects, and there may be other aspects that you're thinking of and saying, why didn't Tim and Sarah talk about X? Or maybe they're contained in what we did talk about in terms of the first aspect of a nurturing community is connection, the second aspect is contribution, and the third aspect is care. So here are a few questions for your reflection to take action on what we have shared with you today. What aspect of Christian community is most important to you? And part of why I want to ask this question and want you to think about it is it's likely that that's where you're going to start. So if care is the place that you start and what is most important, then you can bring the other two aspects around that and find that intersection. The second part of that question is our connection to Jesus enough to create community? Second question is, what contributions are you making to your community? And finally, how do you want others to express care for you? And how are you expressing care for others? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast, and you're looking for episode 176. Or if you want to jump right to the show notes page, head to transformingmission.org/176. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.